I'm 29F, and the story starts when I met Mark at a friend's dinner party one Friday evening. The place was buzzing with chatter and clinking glasses, and I barely knew half the people there. Mark was standing near the kitchen, talking with the host. When our eyes met, he walked over, introduced himself with a confident smile, and started asking questions about my work as a freelance designer. There was an immediate spark. We kept finding each other in every room, standing a little closer each time, laughing a bit louder than everyone else. By the end of the night, he offered to walk me to my car, and when we got there, he pulled me into a soft kiss that felt like something out of a cheesy rom-com. It all moved so fast after that. Within 2 weeks, we were seeing each other almost every day. He'd pick me up from my apartment and take me to cute restaurants or invite me to his place to cook dinner. He always seemed so attentive, remembering the smallest things I'd mention, like how I loved sunflowers, so he'd bring a small bouquet every Sunday. Our weekends were filled with trips to the farmer's market, movie marathons, and drives to little towns nearby just to explore. 6 months after we started dating, Mark suggested a beach trip. He rented a small cabin right on the sand. The second morning there, he dragged me out of bed before sunrise and insisted we walk along the shore. I was cold and half asleep, but he was practically vibrating with excitement. Right as the sun peaked over the ocean, he got down on one knee, pulled out a small velvet box, and asked me to marry him. I was so surprised I almost fell over, but I said yes immediately. He picked me up and spun me around while the waves crashed behind us. It felt like a perfect moment. Meeting his parents a week later was less perfect. They invited us for dinner at their house. His mom opened the door with a polite smile, and his dad gave a stiff handshake. At first, everything seemed fine, but every time I brought up my design projects or clients, his mom's eyes would flick to Mark, then back to me with a tight smile. His dad kept changing the subject. They asked where I saw myself in 5 years, and when I mentioned wanting to grow my freelance business, his mom let out a quiet sigh and looked at her husband. It was small, but I caught it. As the wedding planning started, his mom offered to help with everything. It quickly turned into her making every single decision. She told me my ideas were cute but not practical, and that we needed a real wedding that would impress their family friends. I went along with it because I thought it would make things smoother. Every time I suggested something different, it got ignored. When I told Mark I felt left out, he said his mom just wanted the best for us and I should try not to stress. On our wedding day, right before I walked down the aisle, I overheard his dad telling someone that my dress looked too simple, almost plain. During the ceremony, he repeated it loudly enough that a few people turned to look at me. Mark just laughed it off, patting his dad on the shoulder, and kept the ceremony moving like nothing happened. I tried to focus on saying my vows and smiling for the photos, but it stung. After the honeymoon, we moved into a small house in a quiet neighborhood. I decorated the living room with bright pillows and paintings I made myself. Mark's parents started coming over almost every weekend without warning. They'd point out how the colors clashed or how I should have bought better furniture. Once, his mom even rearranged my kitchen cabinets while I was upstairs. When I came down and asked what she was doing, she said she was fixing them for me. The first family dinner we went to after moving in was awkward from the start. His sister made a joke about how I must be a gold digger because Mark paid most of the mortgage. Everyone laughed, including Mark, who looked down at his plate instead of speaking up. It felt like I was on my own at that table. During our honeymoon, Mark took calls from his mom every day. She asked him how he was surviving with my strange eating habits, like not eating meat. I could hear her voice on the other end of the line. He'd just roll his eyes and keep talking to her instead of telling her to stop. By the end of the trip, I felt more like a guest than a bride. When I landed a big client a month later, I ran to Mark to tell him the good news. He looked up from his laptop and said he thought I was just doing design for fun and didn't realize it was serious. I tried to explain why it was important, but he shrugged and went back to his emails. I adopted a golden retriever puppy named Sunny. Mark's parents came over and scolded me for wasting money on a useless animal. Later, they made a family group chat, adding me to it, and started posting memes making fun of my vegetarian meals. Mark would send laughing emojis instead of asking them to stop. On our first wedding anniversary, I set up a small dinner with candles and his favorite food. I waited hours. When he finally came home, he said he'd lost track of time at a poker night with his dad. I ended up putting the food away and crying alone. My friends stopped coming over because Mark's family would show up without warning and make things uncomfortable. Soon, it was just me in the house most days. One night, we went to his parents' place for game night. His brother joked that I probably couldn't read maps because I'm a woman. Everyone burst out laughing, and Mark slapped his knee, joining in. The breaking point came after a dinner when Mark's mom looked right at me and called me just decorative. Mark stayed silent, taking a sip of wine like he didn't hear a thing. That was when I realized I couldn't keep doing this. The week started with Mark telling me his parents wanted to have us over for a casual family dinner on Saturday. He said it like it was no big deal, but the last dinner hadn't exactly gone well, so I hesitated. He kept pushing, saying it would be good for everyone to be together. I agreed, thinking maybe he'd finally stand up for me if things went wrong again. Saturday evening, we pulled into his parents' driveway right as the sun was setting. Their porch light was already on, casting a yellow glow over the front steps. Mark rang the doorbell and his mother opened the door with a quick glance at me. She looked me up and down, focusing on my sundress, and her mouth tightened. She stepped aside just enough for us to enter, but didn't bother saying anything else. Mark walked in ahead, and I followed him into the living room where his father and sister were already sitting on the couch, drinks in hand. The table was set with fancy plates and tall glasses. Appetizers were spread out, cheese, crackers, slices of meat. I took a seat next to Mark. His father picked up a piece of steak, chewed loudly, and started talking about how important it was for a wife to know how to cook a proper meal. He looked straight at me and asked in a booming voice how I planned to raise kids if I couldn't even cook meat. Mark reached for his wine glass without saying a word. Mark's sister leaned back in her chair and brought up my freelance design work, saying she couldn't imagine how anyone could draw flowers all day and think it was a real job. She asked how many clients I had who paid enough to matter. Mark tapped his fingers on his glass, avoiding my eyes. I tried to answer, explaining a bit about my biggest projects, but Mark's father cut me off every few words, tossing out jokes about how easy it must be to sit at home doodling instead of having a real career. Each time he interrupted, his voice got louder, and his laughter spread around the table until everyone but me was smiling. Halfway through dinner, Mark's mother changed the topic by saying they needed to rehome Sunny, my golden retriever, because he was probably messing up the house I'd one day bring a baby to. She mentioned this out of nowhere, spooning mashed potatoes onto her plate like it was casual dinner talk. I looked at Mark, hoping he'd say something, but he kept his head down, swirling the wine in his glass. I leaned over and told Mark we should leave. He barely looked up and said we couldn't just walk out or his parents would be upset. He told me to sit back down. I sat quietly, my hands shaking under the tablecloth. A few minutes later, his sister pointed her fork at me, saying I must have brainwashed Mark into falling for me, because she couldn't understand why else he'd choose someone like me. She told him he needed to snap out of it before it was too late. Mark wiped his mouth with a napkin and said nothing. Mark stood up and raised his glass, telling everyone to toast to family harmony. His father lifted his glass high, his mother and sister followed, and they all clinked glasses while laughing. I didn't lift mine. I noticed Sunny through the glass door to the backyard, curled in a corner near a flower bed, whimpering softly. The sound cut through the laughter in the dining room. Mark's father dropped his voice and said if I was already this sensitive, I'd never last in their family. He let out a loud laugh, and Mark joined in, chuckling along with everyone else. I stayed seated, watching them laugh together. As soon as dessert plates were cleared, Mark said he'd drive us home. The car ride was dead silent, except for the hum of the engine. The streetlights passed over the windshield, each one making his face flash in and out of shadows. I tried to bring up how everything unfolded at dinner, but he kept his eyes on the road, saying I was overreacting. When we pulled into the driveway, Sunny's tail started thumping against the back seat. I let him out, and he stuck right by my leg, glancing between me and the front door. Inside, the living room was dark, except for a small light above the mantel. Our wedding photo sat there, both of us smiling in a moment that felt like a different lifetime. I walked to the closet and pulled out a small suitcase, unzipping it on the bed. I grabbed a handful of clothes, rolled them tightly, and packed them along with my laptop and important documents from the nightstand drawer. Sunny followed every step I took, eyes wide, refusing to leave my side. I went downstairs for Sunny's leash and food bowls, stuffing them into a tote bag. The kitchen clock ticked loud enough to echo across the room. I could hear Mark moving around upstairs, opening and closing drawers like he was looking for something. I placed the suitcase and tote bag near the front door, then stood still for a minute, staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. My eyes traced the details of our clothes, the flowers in my hair, the way Mark's hand rested on my waist. The silence in the house was heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. Sunny sat down next to me, letting out a soft whine. I ran my hand along his fur, grabbed the suitcase handle, and took a deep breath. The decision was set in my mind. I wasn't going to sleep here tonight. I was leaving. I pulled the suitcase and tote bag to the front door, then walked back upstairs for the last of what I needed. I grabbed my phone charger, a small jewelry box with family heirlooms, and the folder with my birth certificate and social security card. Downstairs, I zipped everything up and checked Sunny's leash, making sure it was clipped tightly. I carried everything to the driveway in 2 trips, loading the back seat of my car with the bags and placing Sunny's food bowls and a bag of his kibble on the floorboards. Sunny stayed pressed to my leg, his fur brushing against me every time I moved. His eyes followed every step I took. When Mark came down the stairs, Sunny stepped in front of me, hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Mark stopped halfway across the living room, eyes flicking between Sunny and the open door. He let out a short laugh, almost like he thought I was joking, and asked if I was really packing over a dinner. His voice bounced off the walls of the quiet house. He stepped closer, but Sunny didn't move aside. Mark paused, looked from the suitcase to my face, and told me I was being dramatic. His tone was flat, like this was just another small argument that would blow over in a few hours. I finished clipping Sunny's leash and picked up his favorite stuffed duck from the living room floor. I walked past Mark without a word, heading for the front door. He followed, voice rising as he told me to stop acting crazy. I placed Sunny in the back seat, shut the door gently, and walked around to the driver's side. Mark stood in the doorway of the house, arms crossed, eyes wide. I told him quietly that every time he stayed silent while his family mocked me, he made his choice. I told him I was making mine now. His mouth opened and closed. He stepped onto the porch, raising his voice as he said I was ruining our marriage over harmless jokes. His words echoed in the dark street, bouncing off the neighbors' fences. I slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and backed down the driveway. Mark stepped onto the lawn, waving his arms as he shouted after the car. His voice faded as I turned the corner and drove into the night. Sunny crawled onto the passenger seat, his head resting in my lap. His tail thumped once, like he knew we were leaving for good. I drove for over an hour on the empty highway, the yellow lines zipping past in the headlights. I pulled into a brightly lit gas station on the outskirts of town. The clock on the dashboard said it was almost midnight. I parked near a payphone, but used my cell to call the after-hours number for my lawyer. The line rang twice before a sleepy voice answered. I explained what had happened and said I was ready to file for divorce as soon as possible. The lawyer promised to get the paperwork started first thing in the morning. I hung up and rested my forehead on the steering wheel. Sunny shifted and let out a small sigh. I scratched his ear, then pulled back onto the road, eyes scanning the signs for a motel. A few miles later, I saw a glowing vacancy sign outside a small building with peeling paint. I pulled into the lot, left the engine running, and went inside to the front desk. The night clerk glanced at Sunny, then at me, and handed over a room key without questions after I showed my ID and swiped my emergency credit card. I carried my suitcase and Sunny's bag up the narrow stairs. The room smelled like old carpet and bleach, I locked the door behind me and set Sonny's bowls on the bathroom floor, filling them with water and kibble. He sniffed them, then walked back to me and leaned his head against my leg. I changed into sweatpants, laid a blanket on the bed, and sat down. Sonny jumped up beside me, curled into a tight ball, and closed his eyes. I pulled my phone charger from the suitcase and plugged it in next to the lamp. The screen lit up with missed calls and texts from Mark, but I ignored them, turning the phone over on the nightstand so the light wouldn't bother me. I lay on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling while Sonny's breathing slowed into a soft rhythm. I wiped tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. The clock on the microwave blinked 2:13 a.m. When the sun started creeping through the thin motel curtains, I sat up and looked around the room. The light made everything look washed out and quiet. Sonny lifted his head, tail thumping twice before curling back up next to me. I got up, washed my face in the small bathroom sink, and combed my hair with my fingers. I took a long look in the mirror. My eyes were red and swollen, but my mouth was set in a straight line. I found my phone on the nightstand, called my cousin Sarah, and explained what had happened. Her voice was steady and firm, and she told me I could come stay with her as long as I needed. I told her I would drive over that day. After ending the call, I packed my things back into the suitcase and zipped it up tight. I grabbed a towel from the bathroom, wiped Sonny's paws, and attached his leash. I double-checked the room to make sure I hadn't left anything behind. I carried the suitcase and bag down the stairs, Sonny trotting by my side, ears perked. I loaded everything into the car again, climbed into the driver's seat, and took a deep breath. I checked the rearview mirror, adjusted it until I could see Sonny's face, and whispered to myself that we were done living in silence. Sonny let out a small bark, almost like he agreed. I turned the key in the ignition, backed out of the parking lot, and headed towards Sarah's house, ready for the next step. Sarah's car pulled into the motel parking lot just after sunrise. She stepped out in jeans and a sweatshirt, scanning the lot until she spotted my car. She walked over, hugged me tight, then started loading my bags into her trunk. Sonny hopped into her backseat, tail wagging as he sniffed the car's interior. I checked out at the front desk, handed over the room key, and followed Sarah's car through the quiet streets until we reached her neighborhood. Sarah's house sat on a corner lot with a tall oak tree shading the driveway. She led me inside, pointing out the guest room down the hall. The bed was already made with fresh sheets, and a folded blanket lay at the foot. Sonny trotted into the room and sniffed every corner before curling up on the rug. I set my suitcase near the dresser and put his bowls in the corner. My phone buzzed with Mark's name flashing on the screen. The call went to voicemail. It rang again. I silenced it and set the phone face down on the dresser. Mark's name kept popping up every few minutes, but I ignored each call. A few hours later, a loud banging rattled the front door. Sarah looked through the peephole, then stepped outside, pulling the door shut behind her. Mark's voice carried through the walls, angry and sharp. He tried to push past Sarah, but she planted her feet and blocked the doorway with her arms crossed. She stood firm, telling him he wasn't coming in. I stepped into the hall behind Sarah. Mark's eyes flicked to me, wild and desperate. He tried to explain how he only stayed quiet at dinners so things wouldn't get worse, repeating that he never meant to hurt me. He raised his voice, saying his family always expected him to put them first, that it wasn't his fault. Sarah stepped to the side just enough for me to look Mark in the eyes. I told him directly he never put our marriage first, and that's why we were done. Mark's voice rose as he tried to talk over me. Sonny appeared at my side, fur bristling, and let out a low growl that made Mark flinch and take a step back. Sarah held up her phone, screen lit up with the emergency dialer, and told Mark he needed to leave or she would call the police. Mark clenched his fists, spun around, and stomped down the walkway, his car tires squealing as he pulled away. My phone lit up with message after message. Mark's parents called me weak, dramatic, and ungrateful in long strings of texts, some coming in rapid bursts. I scrolled through, blocking each number one by one until the screen fell silent. I took a deep breath and turned my phone off completely. A call came in from my lawyer's office line. The paralegal on the other end confirmed the divorce paperwork was being filed that afternoon, and I would get the documents to sign soon. She asked where to send them, and I gave her Sarah's address. That evening, Sarah started cooking pasta in the kitchen. I helped by chopping vegetables while Sonny explored the living room, nosing around toys left out by Sarah's two kids. They came in from the backyard, giggling when Sonny licked their hands. Sarah handed me a spoon to stir the sauce, and steam fogged up my glasses as I leaned over the stove. We plated the food and sat around the dining table, forks clinking and conversation filling the room. After dinner, I watched Sonny chase the kids around the living room, his tail a golden blur. The kids' laughter echoed off the walls. I sat back in my chair, breathing in the warm air and letting the noise wash over me. The house felt full and alive. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could sit still without waiting for the next cruel comment or tense silence. The night outside was calm, the crickets humming, and the lights from the neighbor's porch shining softly through the kitchen window. Mid-morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window while Sarah and I sat at the table drinking coffee. The quiet broke when a car engine roared outside. Tires crunched over gravel as a silver SUV pulled up to the curb. Mark's mother climbed out, slammed her door, and stormed up the walkway. Her voice rang out across the yard, shouting that I was tearing the family apart and demanding I come out to face her. Sarah set her coffee cup down, stood up, and walked to the front door. She stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her, and stood on the porch facing Mark's mother. Their voices rose. Mark's mother kept yelling, hands waving wildly. Sarah kept her stance firm, feet planted, arms crossed. I stayed inside, peeking through the front window between the curtains. My heart beat so hard I could hear it in my ears. Mark's mother shouted that I was a selfish woman who only cared about myself. She raised her voice louder, calling me a disgrace and saying my father would be ashamed of what I'd done if he were still alive. Her words cut deep. the mention of my father twisting something inside me. The shouting grew louder. Neighbors on either side stepped out onto their porches to see what was happening. A couple walked their dog across the street and paused on the sidewalk, eyes wide. Mark's mother kept yelling over Sarah's calm warnings. She glared at the houses around her, realizing the scene she was causing. Her face went red as more neighbors stepped outside or peered through blinds. She stomped back down the walkway, got into her SUV, and reversed so fast the tires squealed on the pavement as she sped away. Sarah stepped back inside, closing the door with a quiet click. She turned to me, pulled me into a hug, and held me tightly. Sonny appeared from behind the couch, tail tucked, eyes darting between us. His legs trembled as he tried to decide if it was safe. I knelt down, stretched my arms out, and he crawled into my lap. I stroked his fur until his shaking slowed. A notification popped up on my phone. My lawyer's office sent a message saying Mark had been officially served with divorce papers at his office. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again with a voicemail from Mark's number. His voice was angry and cracked, saying I was heartless, promising he would fight me for everything in the divorce. I pulled out a small notebook and wrote down the time of the voicemail, what he said, and details of his mother's visit. I kept it open on the kitchen counter so I could add anything new. The doorbell rang, but it was only the mail carrier dropping off a package. Sarah went outside and waved at the neighbors, apologizing for the disturbance. An hour later, the phone rang again. It was my mom's old friend who used to babysit me. She'd heard from my mom about what was happening and offered her guest room if I needed another place to stay. I thanked her and wrote her number in my notebook. Sarah called a locksmith, who agreed to come the next morning. She said she didn't want Mark or his family trying to get inside the house. We spent the rest of the day keeping the kids busy with board games and snacks, while Sonny lay curled up at my feet. That night I tossed and turned, waking up from nightmares of sitting at those family dinners, Mark's family laughing as I sat silent. Each time I woke up, I reminded myself where I was now. In the morning, Sarah brewed coffee while the kids watched cartoons in the living room. She sat across from me at the table and told me she was proud I was finally standing up for myself. Her words steadied me, giving me the strength to keep moving forward. Sarah dropped me off outside my lawyer's office early in the morning. The building stood tall with mirrored windows reflecting the blue sky. Inside, the receptionist led me to a small conference room. My lawyer laid out papers on the table and walked through each step of the divorce strategy. He suggested keeping the house sale neutral and splitting the proceeds fairly so Mark couldn't claim I was taking advantage. He handed me a list of documents to gather, including old bank records. I opened my laptop that afternoon and pulled up joint bank statements going back 2 years. Red flags popped up right away. Small amounts moved to an unfamiliar account each month. The totals added up to thousands. I printed the records and highlighted the transactions. My lawyer added them to the case file and told me they would show Mark's attempts to hide assets. While flipping through the adoption paperwork for Sonny, my lawyer confirmed he counted as my personal property since I adopted him before the wedding. Sonny would stay with me, protected by the original paperwork and receipts in my name. A day later, Mark's lawyer filed a motion demanding joint ownership of Sonny, claiming Mark had a strong emotional bond with him. My lawyer prepared a response showing Sonny's vet bills, microchip registration, and adoption agreement. Each document carried only my name. He submitted them with a statement arguing Sonny's well-being would be better served staying with his primary caretaker, me. Word of the divorce spread quickly through friends and old co-workers. Some people called to check on me, but others sent messages asking why I was making up stories about Mark. A few mutual friends unfriended me on social media after hearing Mark's side. I ran into a former colleague at the grocery store who asked if I was proud of tearing Mark's family apart. I walked away without answering, head held high. Later that week, my lawyer received a letter from Mark's attorney threatening a defamation lawsuit if I didn't retract what he called false claims about the way his family treated me. My lawyer read through it and laughed, telling me nothing I'd shared was false or exaggerated. He said they had no case and advised me to keep documenting every call, text, and interaction. One morning, I walked into the bank with Sarah by my side and met with the branch manager. I signed paperwork, closing our joint account. The teller transferred my portion of the balance into a new account under my name only. I walked out of the bank feeling lighter, knowing Mark no longer had access to my money. Back at Sarah's house, I spent the afternoon organizing papers into folders and labeling them with sticky notes. Sarah offered to keep them in a locked box in her closet. That night, we went to the courthouse together. The clerk helped us file paperwork related to the financial discoveries, and Sarah never let go of my hand until we stepped back onto the courthouse steps. At home, I microwaved popcorn, settled onto the couch with Sonny, and turned on an old black and white comedy. Sonny dozed with his head on my lap while I laughed at the silly jokes, feeling more relaxed than I had in weeks. Sarah walked by and smiled, shaking her head when she saw me giggling at the screen. The doorbell rang near bedtime. A delivery driver stood on the porch holding a huge bouquet of red roses. He handed it to me along with a card that read, "Let's talk." I walked straight to the kitchen trash can and dropped the flowers inside. I took out the trash bag, tied it tight, and carried it to the bin by the curb. Upstairs, I brushed my teeth, folded clean clothes, and placed them in neat stacks on the dresser. I turned off the light, climbed into bed, and pulled the blanket up around my shoulders. Sonny curled up at my feet, his soft breathing filling the room. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet of the house, knowing each step I'd taken moved me further from Mark and closer to the life I deserved. The email from my lawyer arrived early in the morning with the subject line court date confirmed. The divorce hearing was set for just 2 weeks away, sooner than either of us expected. Papers went back and forth between the lawyers as my attorney gathered every piece of evidence. He uncovered another hidden account Mark had kept, with even more money siphoned away. Statements showing these secret transfers were submitted to the court, added to the growing file of Mark's financial misconduct. On the morning of the hearing, Sarah drove me to the courthouse. The parking lot was half full when I stepped out of the car with Sonny on his leash. Mark stood near the side entrance, eyes scanning the lot. He walked straight toward me, cutting me off before I reached the doors. His voice shook as he asked for another chance, words tumbling over each other as he tried to explain how things could still work out. I kept walking. He grabbed my arm, and I pulled it free, telling him there was nothing left to discuss. He froze when I said I was done letting him and his family treat me like I didn't matter. Inside the courtroom, the judge listened to both sides. Bank statements, emails, and call logs were spread across the table in front of my lawyer. The judge looked through the paperwork, stopping to ask Mark's lawyer about the hidden accounts. Mark's face flushed red as his lawyer admitted they couldn't explain the missing money. The judge ruled that the financial dishonesty worked in my favor when splitting assets. The paperwork for Sonny came next. The judge reviewed adoption documents, vet receipts, and photos showing me with Sonny from the time he was a puppy. The judge ruled that Sonny would stay with me permanently, citing the clear evidence that I had been his sole caregiver. Later that afternoon, both lawyers met in the hallway to finalize the house sale. The agreement was set to sell the house and split the money evenly. My lawyer confirmed I'd get my share wired directly into my account, giving me enough for a deposit on a new place. I stepped outside the courtroom as Mark's parents glared from across the hall, whispering to each other. I walked past them without slowing down, eyes forward, Sonny trotting at my side. The sunlight felt warm on my face as I stepped into the parking lot. Sarah pulled up, leaning across the seat to open the door. She wrapped me in a hug when I climbed in, tears welling up in both our eyes as she told me how proud she was. We drove away with the windows down, the wind rushing through Sonny's fur as he stuck his head out, tongue lolling. 3 days later, I signed a lease for a small 2-bedroom apartment with a fenced backyard. Movers helped carry in boxes, while I arranged each room just the way I wanted. On my first night there, I made pasta, lit a single candle on the table, and toasted with sparkling water. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings. The next morning, I updated my emergency contacts to include only Sarah, my lawyer, and the friends who had supported me. The sunrise spilled gold across the backyard as I sat on the porch with Sonny curled beside me. The quiet was comforting. Birds chirped from the trees, and the sky glowed softly. I felt ready for whatever came next, free and stronger than ever before.